The summer dust settled over Victoria Hayes like a shroud as she knelt beside the well pump, her knuckles white against the wooden handle, her dress already soaked through with sweat, though it was barely past dawn in Hecla, Montana. She had been praying again, whispering the same desperate words she had spoken every morning for the past 3 years, begging God to change Marcus, to soften his heart, to make him the man she had foolishly believed he would become when she married him at 19. The bruise on her ribs throbbed with each breath, hidden beneath the high collar of her dress, a reminder that some prayers seemed to fall on deaf ears, no matter how many times they were uttered. Victoria was 22 now, and the hope that had once burned bright in her chest had dimmed to barely a flicker, kept alive only by the voices of the church women who patted her hand and told her to stay, to pray harder, to be a better wife, as if love and devotion could transform cruelty into kindness. The sound of hooves on the hard-packed earth made Victoria lift her head, shading her eyes against the rising sun. A rider was approaching from the east, silhouetted against the pink and gold sky, sitting tall in the saddle with the easy confidence of a man who had spent more of his life on horseback than on his own 2 feet. She did not recognize him, and strangers were not uncommon in Hecla, a small mining town that had sprung up along the Missouri River in the 1880s, but something about the way he carried himself made her pause in her work. He rode a sturdy bay mare, and his hat was pulled low over his face, but even from a distance she could see the dust of long travel on his clothes. Victoria quickly turned back to the pump, not wanting to be caught staring. Marcus would be waking soon, and if breakfast was not on the table, there would be hell to pay. She filled her bucket with trembling hands, the weight of it pulling at her shoulders as she hurried toward the small house that sat at the edge of town. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a leaning porch, but Marcus had been proud of it when they first married, before the drinking had started in earnest, before his temper had turned from quick flashes to sustained storms that left her cowering in corners and making excuses to the neighbors. Inside, she set about making coffee and frying salt pork, moving quietly through the dim kitchen. Marcus was still asleep in the bedroom, his snores rattling through the thin walls. Victoria worked mechanically, her mind already somewhere else, already retreating to that safe place inside herself where his words and fists could not quite reach. She had become an expert at disappearing while still standing right in front of him, at making herself small and silent and invisible. The stranger she had seen riding into town kept drifting into her thoughts as she worked. There had been something about him, something in the straight line of his spine and the purposeful way he moved that spoke of a different kind of man than the ones she knew in Hecla. Most of the men here were miners or ranchers, hard men made harder by hard lives, men who drank away their wages and took their frustrations out on whatever was closest. Her own father had been one of them before consumption took him when Victoria was 17, leaving her and her mother alone with nothing but debts and the thin charity of the church. Victoria! Marcus's voice came from the bedroom, rough with sleep and the previous night's whiskey. Where is my breakfast? Coming, she called back, her voice steady despite the way her hands shook as she plated the food. She had learned not to show fear. It only made things worse. Marcus stumbled into the kitchen, his hair sticking up in greasy spikes, his eyes bloodshot and mean. He was not a large man, barely taller than Victoria herself, but he had the wiry strength of someone who had worked hard labor all his life, and he knew how to use his fists. He dropped into his chair without a word of greeting, and Victoria set his plate in front of him, then retreated to the stove. Sit down and eat, he said, around a mouthful of pork. Victoria took her place across from him, but she had no appetite. She pushed the food around her plate and kept her eyes down, waiting for whatever storm might be brewing in him this morning. I saw Ben Wright yesterday, Marcus said. He told me you were at the church again, praying with those old biddies. I go to prayer meeting on Wednesdays, Victoria said carefully. I have always gone. Maybe you should spend less time on your knees in church and more time on your knees here, doing what a wife is supposed to do. His laugh was ugly, and Victoria felt her face flush hot with shame and anger. Maybe if you tried harder to please me, I would not have to go to the saloon every night. Victoria said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not make things worse. She had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Marcus finished his breakfast and pushed back from the table, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. I am working a double shift at the mine today. I will be back late. Have supper ready. He grabbed his hat and was gone without another word, leaving Victoria alone in the sudden silence. She sat for a long moment, staring at the scarred wood of the table, feeling the familiar weight of despair settling over her like a heavy blanket. The churchwomen meant well, she knew that. Sister Margaret and Sister Ruth and all the others who gathered her into their prayer circles and told her to have faith, to trust in God's timing, to remember that marriage was a sacred covenant that should not be broken except by death. They told her that Marcus would change if she prayed hard enough, if she loved him well enough, if she submitted herself completely to her wifely duties. They told her that leaving was not an option, that a woman alone had no place in the world, that she should count her blessings and remember that suffering was the path to holiness. Victoria had believed them once. She had prayed so hard her knees had gone numb on the church floor. She had tried every kindness, every gentleness, every possible way to reach whatever good might still exist in Marcus's heart. But 3 years had passed, and he had only gotten worse, and Victoria was starting to wonder if maybe God did not hear the prayers of women like her at all. She cleared the table and washed the dishes, then sat down with her mending basket. There was always mending to do, shirts to patch and socks to darn, the endless small tasks that filled the hours of her days. Her hands moved automatically, the needle flashing in and out of the fabric, while her mind drifted. She thought about the stranger on the bay mare, wondered who he was and what had brought him to Hecla. The town was not on the way to anywhere important, just a hardscrabble collection of buildings clinging to the edge of the mountains, sustained by the silver mine that employed most of the men for miles around. Strangers came through occasionally, gamblers and drifters and men running from something, but they rarely stayed long. There was not much in Hecla to hold anyone who had a choice about leaving. Victoria wished, not for the first time, that she was one of those people, that she could just saddle a horse and ride away, leave Marcus and the church women and the endless gray sameness of her life behind. But she had no money of her own, nowhere to go, no skills beyond keeping house and mending clothes. The world beyond Hecla was vast and terrifying, and she would be utterly alone in it. At least here she had a roof over her head and food to eat, even if the price she paid for them was higher than she had ever imagined when she stood in front of the preacher and promised to love and honor Marcus until death parted them. The morning wore on. Victoria finished her mending and swept the floors and beat the dust from the rugs. She made bread dough and set it to rise, then went out to the garden to pull weeds from the struggling vegetable patch. The sun climbed higher, turning the air thick and hot, and sweat ran down her back in rivulets. Montana in July was no joke. The heat pressing down from a cloudless sky, the mountains in the distance shimmering like mirages. She was bent over the tomato plants when she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Victoria straightened quickly, pushing her hair back from her face, expecting to see one of the neighbor women coming to borrow something or spread gossip. Instead, she found herself looking up at the stranger she had seen riding into town that morning. Up close, he was even more striking than he had been at a distance. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, hard build of a man who spent his life working outdoors. His face was tanned dark by the sun, with sharp cheekbones and a straight nose and a mouth that looked like it might smile easily, though he was not smiling now. His eyes were what caught her attention most, though. They were a pale, clear gray, like winter sky, and they looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "I am sorry to bother you. I am looking for the Hayes place. I was told it was at the edge of town." "This is it," Victoria said, suddenly conscious of how she must look, dusty and disheveled, and damp with sweat. "I am Victoria Hayes. Can I help you?" "My name is Yates Ashford," he said. "I am here about the horses." Victoria blinked. The horses? Your husband put an advertisement in the paper in Helena, looking for someone to train a string of wild horses he bought off a ranch down south. I am a horse trainer. I have been traveling for near about 2 weeks to get here. Victoria felt her stomach sink. She knew nothing about any horses, which meant that Marcus had made this arrangement without telling her, which meant he had probably been drinking when he did it and had already forgotten about it. I am sorry, she said. My husband is at the mine today. He will not be back until late tonight. Yates Ashford's expression did not change, but she saw something flicker in those pale eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration. I see. Is there somewhere in town I can put up my horse and get a room for the night? There is a boarding house on Main Street and a livery stable next to it, Victoria said. Mrs. Patterson runs the boarding house. She will take care of you. Much obliged, Yates said. He started to turn away, then paused. Madam, if you do not mind my saying so, you ought to get out of this heat. You look about ready to fall over. Victoria felt a flush creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the temperature. I am fine, Mr. Ashford. Thank you for your concern. He nodded once, then walked away, leading his horse by the reins. Victoria stood in the garden and watched him go, her heart doing strange things in her chest. No one had expressed concern for her welfare in so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen as something other than a problem or an inconvenience. The simple kindness of his words, the genuine care in his tone, made something crack open inside her that she had been holding tightly closed. She went back to her weeding with shaking hands, trying to push the encounter from her mind. It did not matter that Yates Ashford had kind eyes and a gentle voice. It did not matter that he had looked at her like she was a person worth caring about. She was a married woman, and he was just passing through, and nothing could or should come of a stranger's momentary kindness. But for the rest of the day, as she worked through her endless list of chores, Victoria found her thoughts returning again and again to the horse trainer with the gray eyes. She wondered what his life was like, traveling from place to place, free to go wherever the work took him. She wondered if he had family somewhere, people who loved him and worried about him. She wondered what it would be like to be the kind of person who could just ride into a new town and start a conversation with a stranger without fear twisting in your gut. Marcus came home long after dark, drunk and mean as a snake. Victoria had his supper waiting, but he knocked the plate off the table before she could set it down, sending food and broken crockery scattering across the floor. 3 years, he snarled, backing her against the wall. 3 years and you have not given me a son. What good are you? What is the point of you? Victoria knew better than to mention that he was too drunk most nights to even attempt the act that might result in children, knew better than to point out that maybe the fault lay with him and not with her. She made herself small and silent, waiting for the storm to pass. It was worse than usual that night. Marcus's fists found her ribs and her arms and the side of her face, and Victoria bit down on her cries, refusing to give him the satisfaction of hearing her pain. When it was finally over, he stumbled to the bedroom and passed out fully clothed on top of the blankets, leaving her to clean up the broken dishes and the spilled food. Victoria worked slowly, her body aching and her left eye already starting to swell. She was numb inside, past tears, past hope. She had been praying for 3 years for Marcus to change, and he had only gotten worse. How much longer was she supposed to wait? How much longer was she supposed to endure? When the kitchen was finally clean, she did not go to the bedroom. She could not bear the thought of lying next to Marcus, listening to his drunken snores, pretending that everything was normal. Instead, she took a blanket from the chest and made a bed for herself on the floor in the corner of the kitchen, curling up small and tight, trying to find some position that did not make her ribs scream in protest. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and stared at nothing, her mind going in circles. The churchwomen would tell her this was a test, that God was refining her through suffering, that she needed to pray more and love harder and submit more completely. But Victoria was starting to think that maybe they were wrong. Maybe God had not meant for her to suffer like this. Maybe there were some things that prayer could not fix. The thought was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Morning came too soon. Victoria dragged herself upright, her body stiff and sore, and began the familiar routine of making breakfast. Marcus was still asleep, and she was grateful for the reprieve. She moved quietly, not wanting to wake him, hoping he would sleep until it was time for his shift and she could have a few more hours of peace. She had just taken the coffee off the stove when there was a knock at the door. Victoria froze, her heart suddenly pounding. No one ever came to the house this early except in emergencies. She set down the coffee pot and went to the door, opening it a crack to peer out. Yates Ashford stood on the porch, his hat in his hands. In the early morning light, she could see his face more clearly than she had the day before. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 25 or 26, with the weathered look of someone who had lived a hard life but not a cruel one. His eyes went immediately to her face, and she saw them widen slightly as he took in the swelling around her eye and the bruise darkening her cheek. "Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly, "I am sorry to call so early. I was hoping to speak to your husband before he left for the mine." "He is still asleep," Victoria said, keeping her voice low. "I do not want to wake him." Something passed across Yates's face, some emotion she could not quite read. He studied her for a long moment, and she resisted the urge to touch the bruise on her cheek, to try to hide what was so plainly visible. "Madam," Yates said, his voice even quieter than before, "are you all right?" The question, spoken with such genuine concern, nearly undid her. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "I am fine," she said, the lie automatic. "I just had a fall yesterday. I am clumsy sometimes." Yates did not look like he believed her, but he did not press. "When would be a good time to come back and speak to your husband about the horses?" "He works the day shift," Victoria said. "He should be home by 6 o'clock tonight. You could come then." "I will do that," Yates said. He settled his hat back on his head, but he did not immediately leave. He stood there on the porch, looking at her with those clear gray eyes, and Victoria had the strange sensation that he was seeing straight through all her carefully constructed defenses, straight down to the scared, desperate woman she really was underneath. "Mrs. Hayes," he said finally, "if you ever need help, any kind of help, I am staying at the Patterson boarding house, room 3. You can come find me there." Victoria felt her throat close up. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and Yates touched his hat brim again and walked away. She closed the door and leaned against it, her hands pressed to her mouth, fighting back sobs. A stranger, a man she had met only yesterday, had shown her more kindness and concern in 2 brief conversations than Marcus had shown her in 3 years of marriage. The unfairness of it, the cruel irony of it, was almost more than she could bear. Marcus woke an hour later and ate his breakfast in surly silence before heading to the mine. Victoria was left alone with her bruises and her thoughts. She tried to pray, kneeling beside the bed the way she had done every day for years, but the words would not come. Her mind was blank, her heart empty. She could not summon the faith to believe that Marcus would change, could not find the hope to keep going as she had been. She thought about what Yates had said. If you ever need help. But what kind of help could he possibly give her? He was a horse trainer passing through town, not a miracle worker. He could not change Marcus. He could not give her a different life. He could not undo the vows she had spoken or the years she had already spent trying to make this marriage work. The day dragged by. Victoria washed clothes and hung them to dry in the brutal sun, scrubbed floors that did not need scrubbing, peeled potatoes for supper. She moved through the tasks like a ghost, her mind elsewhere. As 6 o'clock approached, her anxiety began to build. Marcus would be home soon, and Yates Ashford would be coming by to discuss the horses, and Victoria had no idea how that conversation would go. Marcus could be charming when he wanted to be, especially around other men, but he could also be unpredictable, especially if he had been drinking during his dinner break. She was putting the finishing touches on supper when Marcus came through the door. He was in a better mood than he had been that morning, whistling tunelessly as he hung up his hat. Victoria relaxed slightly. Maybe tonight would be one of the good nights, the rare evenings when he was almost the man she had thought she was marrying. "Supper's nearly ready," she said. "Also, a man came by this morning. Yates Ashford. He says you hired him to train some horses?" Marcus's face lit up. "That is right. I forgot all about that. I bought 6 wild horses off Tom Brennan last month when I was in Helena. They are at Brennan's ranch outside town. I figured we could break them and sell them for a profit. Ashford has a reputation as the best horse trainer in the territory." Victoria was surprised. She had assumed the horse deal was another one of Marcus's drunken impulses, but it seemed he had actually put some thought into it. "He said he would come by at 6 to talk to you about it." "Good, good," Marcus said, rubbing his hands together. "This could be a real moneymaker, Victoria. Those horses will be worth twice what I paid for them once they are trained." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Marcus went to answer it, and Victoria heard him greeting Yates with loud bonhomie, inviting him in. She stayed in the kitchen, putting food on the table, listening to the murmur of male voices from the front room. "Come have some supper with us, Ashford," Marcus was saying. "We can talk about the horses over a meal. Victoria, set another place." Victoria did as she was told, her hands moving automatically. A moment later, Marcus came into the kitchen with Yates behind him. Yates's eyes found hers immediately, and she saw the concern in them, the question. She gave him a tiny shake of her head, hoping he would understand. "Do not say anything. Do not make this worse." They sat down to eat, Marcus at the head of the table, Yates across from Victoria. Marcus dominated the conversation, talking about the horses and his plans for them, his voice booming and confident. Yates listened and nodded and asked occasional questions, his tone professional and courteous. Victoria said nothing, keeping her eyes on her plate, trying to make herself invisible. But she was aware of Yates in a way that made her skin prickle. She could feel him watching her when Marcus was not looking, could sense the weight of his attention. It was not the predatory, possessive way Marcus watched her, looking for flaws and failures. It was something else entirely, something that felt almost like respect. "So what do you think, Ashford?" Marcus said, pushing his plate away. "Can you get those horses trained up in 6 weeks? That is what I am paying you for." 6 weeks is tight for 6 wild horses," Yates said carefully. "Depends on how wild they really are and what you want them trained to do. If you just want them broke to saddle so they can be sold as riding horses, I can probably do that. If you want them trained to any kind of real standard, it will take longer." "Broke to saddle is fine," Marcus said, "as long as they are not going to throw whoever buys them. I do not care about the rest." Yates nodded slowly. "All right, I will need a place to work with them. Brennan's ranch has a corral I can use?" "It does," Marcus confirmed. "You can ride out there tomorrow and take a look at them. I will give you half your fee up front and the rest when you are done." They shook hands on it, and Marcus poured whiskey for both of them, his mood expansive. Victoria cleared the table and began washing dishes, grateful to have something to do with her hands. She could hear Marcus and Yates talking in the other room, their voices rising and falling. Marcus was already getting loud, the whiskey loosening his tongue and his temper. Victoria worked faster, wanting to be done with the dishes before things took a turn. She had just dried the last plate when she heard Marcus's voice rise sharply. "What do you mean, you do not drink much? What kind of man turns down good whiskey?" "I did not say I was turning it down," Yates said, his tone still calm. "I just said I do not drink much. 1 glass is enough for me." "1 glass," Marcus said scornfully. "You sound like a woman or a preacher. Which one are you, Ashford?" There was a pause, and Victoria held her breath, tension coiling in her stomach. She knew that tone in Marcus's voice, knew what came after it. I am a man who knows his limits, Yates said evenly, and I like to keep my head clear when I am working with horses. Animals can tell when you have been drinking, and they do not trust it. It was a diplomatic answer, one that gave Marcus no real opening to pick a fight. Victoria felt a grudging admiration for the way Yates had handled it. Marcus grunted, mollified, and the conversation moved on to other topics. Victoria finished in the kitchen and retreated to the bedroom, not wanting to be in the same room with Marcus and his whiskey any longer than necessary. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited, listening to the sounds from the front room. Eventually, she heard Yates making his excuses to leave, heard the scrape of chairs and the sound of the door opening and closing. Then Marcus was in the bedroom, swaying slightly, his eyes bright with drink. "Why did you not come sit with us?" he demanded. "It is rude, leaving me alone with a guest like that. I thought you would want to talk business," Victoria said carefully. "I did not want to interrupt." "Interrupt," Marcus repeated, his voice mocking. "You think you are important enough to interrupt? You think any man wants to hear what you have to say?" He took a step closer, and Victoria flinched back instinctively. But Marcus did not hit her. Instead, he laughed, a mean, ugly sound, and turned away. "You are pathetic," he said over his shoulder. "No wonder God has not seen fit to give you a child. He knows what a useless mother you would be." He left the room, and Victoria sat frozen on the bed, his words echoing in her head. She had heard them before, or versions of them, but they never got easier to bear. Each insult was a small cut, and she had so many cuts now that she felt like she was bleeding all the time, invisibly, a wound that no one else could see. She did not know how long she sat there before she heard Marcus's snores starting up from the front room. He had passed out on the sofa, which meant she could sleep in the bed tonight. Small mercies. Victoria undressed slowly, her movements mechanical. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror over the dresser and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her face was pale beneath the bruises, her eyes hollow and empty. She looked older than 22, worn down and used up. She thought about Yates Ashford's words again. If you ever need help. But what could he do? What could anyone do? She was trapped in this marriage by law and religion and the expectations of everyone around her. The only way out was Marcus's death or her own, and she was too much of a coward to make either of those things happen. The next morning, Marcus left early to take Yates out to see the horses. Victoria was relieved to have him gone. She needed the space to think, to try to make sense of the chaos in her head and heart. She went through her morning routine, then walked to the church. It was Thursday, and there was a women's prayer group that met in the afternoons, but Victoria had a key to the building, and sometimes she came on her own, just to sit in the quiet and try to find some peace. The church was cool and dim inside, a welcome respite from the heat outside. Victoria walked up the aisle and sank into a pew near the front, folding her hands in her lap. She tried to pray, but no words came. She just sat there, staring at the simple wooden cross on the wall, feeling empty and lost. "Victoria?" She turned to find Sister Margaret coming down the aisle, her round face creased with concern. Sister Margaret was in her 50s, a widow who had made the church the center of her life. She was kind in her way, but she had very firm ideas about a woman's duty. "I did not expect to see you here today," Sister Margaret said, settling into the pew beside Victoria. "Are you all right, child?" "I am fine," Victoria said automatically. Sister Margaret studied her face, taking in the bruises. "You fell again?" "Yes," Victoria said, the lie coming easily now. "I am so clumsy." Sister Margaret made a small sound in her throat, half sympathy and half disapproval. "You need to be more careful, dear. A wife's appearance reflects on her husband." Victoria said nothing. She did not have the energy to argue. "I heard that a horse trainer has come to town," Sister Margaret continued. "Marcus hired him to work with some wild horses. That seems like a wise investment." "I suppose," Victoria said, You do not sound very enthusiastic. Sister Margaret patted Victoria's hand. You should be pleased that your husband is working so hard to provide for you. Many women would be grateful for a man like Marcus, a man who works steady and keeps a roof over your head. Victoria felt something snap inside her, a rope that had been pulled too tight for too long, finally breaking. Sister Margaret, she said, her voice shaking, I have been praying for Marcus to change for 3 years. I have prayed every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. I have done everything the Bible says a wife should do. I have submitted to him. I have respected him. I have tried to love him. And he has only gotten worse. How much longer am I supposed to wait? How much longer am I supposed to pray? Sister Margaret's face had gone very still. Victoria, marriage is a sacred covenant. You made a vow before God to stay with Marcus in good times and bad. You cannot just give up because things are difficult. Difficult? Victoria heard her voice rising and could not stop it. He beats me, Sister Margaret. He comes home drunk almost every night and he beats me. He tells me I am worthless, that I am a failure, that God does not love me because I have not given him a son. Is that what God wants for me? Is that what marriage is supposed to be? Sister Margaret looked genuinely shocked, as if she had never considered that Victoria's falls might be something other than clumsiness. Victoria, I had no idea things were that bad, but you must understand, a man's home is his castle. What happens between a husband and wife is private. We cannot interfere. So I should just stay and keep praying? Victoria felt tears streaming down her face now. I should just accept this as God's will for my life? I know it is hard, Sister Margaret said, her voice gentler now. But yes, you should stay and keep praying. God can change any heart, Victoria. You just have to have faith. And perhaps you should examine your own behavior. Are you being the best wife you can be? Are you making your home a peaceful place for Marcus to come home to? Sometimes our husbands act out because we are not meeting their needs. Victoria stood up abruptly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I have heard enough, she said. Thank you for your time, Sister Margaret. She walked out of the church without looking back, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. She had never spoken to one of the churchwomen like that before, had never dared to voice her doubts and fears so plainly. And Sister Margaret's response had confirmed what Victoria had been starting to suspect, that no one in this town was going to help her. They would just keep telling her to pray and wait and endure, no matter how bad things got. She walked blindly through the streets, not paying attention to where she was going, her vision blurred with tears. She found herself on Main Street, standing in front of the Patterson boarding house. She stared up at it, thinking about Yates Ashford in room 3, thinking about his offer of help. But what could he do? He was just a horse trainer. He was not a preacher or a lawyer or anyone with any power to change her situation. And besides, she barely knew him. It would be foolish to trust him just because he had kind eyes and had spoken to her gently. Victoria turned away from the boarding house and walked home. She spent the rest of the day working herself into exhaustion, scrubbing every surface in the house until her hands were raw and her back ached. Physical pain was easier to deal with than emotional pain. At least physical pain had a clear cause and a clear solution. Marcus came home at his usual time, sober for once, in a good mood. Those horses are going to be perfect, he announced. Ashford thinks we can get top dollar for them. This was a smart investment, Victoria. You should be proud of me. I am, Victoria said, because it was easier than arguing. They ate supper in relative peace, and Marcus went to bed early, tired from a long day at the mine and the ride out to Brennan's ranch. Victoria lay beside him in the dark, listening to his breathing even out into sleep, and tried to imagine what her life might look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. The same house, the same chores, the same bruises and insults and hollow emptiness. Growing old with a man who did not love her, who had maybe never loved her, who saw her as nothing more than property or a burden. She could not do it. The realization settled over her like a weight and a relief at the same time. She could not live like this for the rest of her life. She had prayed long enough. She had waited long enough. Something had to change, and if God was not going to change Marcus, then Victoria was going to have to change her own circumstances. The thought was terrifying. She had no money, no family, no skills that would allow her to support herself. But she also had nothing left to lose. Marcus had already taken everything from her that mattered, except her life itself, and if she stayed, Victoria suspected he would eventually take that too, whether intentionally or not. She started making plans, small plans at first, just ideas really, but they grew and took shape in her mind over the following days. She began setting aside small amounts of food, things that would not spoil, hiding them in a box under the floorboards of the kitchen. She took inventory of her clothes, figuring out what she could carry if she had to leave quickly. She watched and listened, paying attention to the stage schedule and the train schedule, figuring out how far her hidden pennies and dimes might take her if she could get away. The world beyond Hecla was huge and frightening, but Victoria was starting to think it could not possibly be worse than the world she was living in now. Yates came by the house several times over the next 2 weeks to give Marcus updates on the horse's training. Victoria saw him only briefly during these visits, serving coffee or lemonade to the two men while they talked business, but each time their eyes met, she felt that same strange connection, that sense of being truly seen by another person. The fourth time Yates came by, Marcus was not home yet from the mine. Victoria opened the door to find the horse trainer standing on the porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes," he said. "I thought Marcus would be home by now. I can come back later." "He should be here any minute," Victoria said. "You are welcome to wait inside, out of the heat." Yates hesitated, then nodded and followed her into the house. Victoria poured him a glass of water and then stood by the window, watching the road for Marcus. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. "Mrs. Hayes," Yates said finally, "forgive me for being forward, but are you all right? You seem troubled." Victoria kept her eyes on the window. "I am fine, Mr. Ashford. Thank you for asking." "You do not have to lie to me," Yates said quietly. "I have seen enough to know that things are not fine, and I want you to know that my offer still stands. If you need help, any kind of help, you can come to me." Victoria turned to look at him then, really look at him. He was sitting at her kitchen table, his work-roughened hands wrapped around the glass of water, his gray eyes serious and kind. There was no judgment in his face, no condemnation, just genuine concern for a woman he barely knew. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you help me? You do not know me. This is not your business." "Maybe it should be someone's business," Yates said. "And I may not know you well, Mrs. Hayes, but I know enough. I know that you deserve better than what you are getting. I know that no woman should live in fear in her own home. And I know that sometimes people need help getting out of situations they cannot escape on their own." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. "The church says I should stay and keep praying for him to change. They say marriage is forever, that I made a vow before God." "With all due respect to the church," Yates said, his voice hard, "I think God would rather see you safe and happy than dead or broken, and I do not think any vow requires you to submit to abuse." The word hung in the air between them. Abuse. Victoria had never said it out loud, had never allowed herself to name what Marcus did to her. But hearing Yates say it, hearing him acknowledge the truth that everyone else in town seemed determined to ignore or excuse, made something break open in her chest. "I do not know what to do," she said, the admission pulled from somewhere deep inside her. "I have nowhere to go, no money, no family. I am trapped." "You are not trapped," Yates said firmly. "You have options. They might not be easy options, but they exist." "Like what?" Victoria heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. Yates stood up and crossed to where she stood by the window. He did not touch her, keeping a respectful distance, but his presence was solid and reassuring. Like leaving, like going somewhere Marcus cannot find you and starting over. It will be hard, but it can be done. I told you I have no money. I cannot even afford a train ticket out of town. You would not be doing it alone, Yates said. I would help you. Victoria stared at him. Why would you do that? What could you possibly gain from helping me? Yates was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. Because it is the right thing to do, he said finally, and because I have seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing while someone suffers. I do not want to be that person, Mrs. Hayes. I do not want to walk away from Hecla knowing I left you here to face more of what you have already endured. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but at that moment she saw Marcus coming up the road. He is here, she said quickly, stepping away from the window. You. Yates nodded and moved back to the table, his expression shuddering into professional neutrality. By the time Marcus came through the door, there was nothing to suggest that any conversation beyond polite small talk had taken place. But Victoria carried Yates's words with her through the rest of the day and into the night. You are not trapped. You have options. The idea was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Could she really leave? Could she really turn her back on her marriage, on everything she had been taught about duty and honor and a woman's place? Could she survive in the world on her own, or with the help of a man she barely knew? The questions circled in her mind, giving her no peace. Over the next week, Victoria found herself watching Yates whenever he came by. She noticed things about him that she had not paid attention to before. The way he moved, quiet and sure of himself. The way he spoke to the horses he was training with patience and respect rather than force and fear. The way he treated everyone he met with basic courtesy, whether they were wealthy or poor, male or female. He was different from any man she had known. Marcus was all bluster and anger, quick to take offense and quicker to lash out. Her father had been much the same, ruling his household with an iron fist and expecting instant obedience. But Yates had a quiet confidence that did not need to prove itself through violence or intimidation. He was comfortable in his own skin in a way that Victoria envied. She began to understand, slowly, that what she felt when she looked at Yates was not just gratitude for his kindness. It was something deeper and more dangerous. She was drawn to him in a way that had nothing to do with his offer of help and everything to do with who he was as a person. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, whether he was thinking about her too. The realization made her feel guilty and ashamed. She was a married woman, even if her marriage was a nightmare. She had no business thinking about another man, no business feeling the flutter in her stomach when Yates smiled at her, or the warmth that spread through her chest when their hands accidentally brushed. But she could not seem to stop herself. Yates had awakened something in her that had been dormant for years, maybe had never existed at all. The possibility of being loved and valued and treated with respect. The possibility of a different kind of life. 3 weeks into his stay in Hecla, Yates stopped by the house in the middle of the afternoon when Marcus was at the mine. Victoria answered the door and found him standing there with his hat in his hands and an expression on his face that made her heart start to race. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I need to talk to you. Can I come in?" Victoria glanced nervously up and down the street, but no one was around. She opened the door wider, and Yates stepped inside. They stood in the front room, an awkward distance between them, and Victoria waited for him to speak. "I am finishing up with the horses this week," Yates said. "Marcus wants me to bring them into town on Saturday, so potential buyers can come look at them. After that, I will be leaving Hecla." Victoria felt her stomach drop. She had known this day was coming, but hearing the words out loud made it real in a way it had not been before. "I see," she said quietly. "I need to know what you have decided," Yates said, "about what we talked about before, about leaving." "I have not decided anything," Victoria said. "I do not even know what I would be deciding. You offered to help me leave, but you never explained what that would look like. Where would I go? What would I do? How would I live?" Yates took a breath. I have been thinking about that. I have a sister in Denver. She runs a boarding house there, and she is always looking for help. She would give you a job and a place to stay, no questions asked. You would be safe there, and you could start building a new life. And how would I get to Denver? Walk? Victoria heard the bitterness in her voice. I would take you, Yates said simply. When I leave Hecla, you would come with me. We would travel together, and I would make sure you got to Denver safely. Victoria stared at him. People would talk. They would say terrible things. They would think we were running away together, that we were having an affair. I do not care what people think, Yates said, and you will be long gone by the time the talk starts. Let them say whatever they want. You will be safe, and that is all that matters. Marcus would come after me, Victoria said. He would never just let me go. He would have to find you first, Yates pointed out. And Denver is a big city, Mrs. Hayes. You could disappear there easily enough, especially with my sister's help. Victoria walked to the window and looked out at the dusty street, at the town that had been her prison for 3 years. Everything in her had been taught to believe that leaving her husband was wrong, that it was a sin, that it would doom her soul. But she was starting to think that staying might doom her soul just as surely. How could it be God's will for her to live in constant fear and pain? How could it be righteous to endure Marcus's cruelty just because a preacher had spoken some words over them years ago? Why are you doing this? She asked without turning around. You could just finish your job and leave. You do not owe me anything. She heard Yates move closer, though he still kept a respectful distance. Because it is the right thing to do, he said. And because I care about what happens to you. Victoria turned to face him. You barely know me. I know enough, Yates said, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Something that looked almost like longing. I know that you are brave and strong, and you deserve so much better than this. I know that I cannot leave this town knowing I did nothing to help you when I had the chance. If I do this, Victoria said slowly, if I leave with you, people will think we are together. They will think we are running away to be with each other. Would that be such a terrible thing? Yates asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Victoria felt her heart pounding in her chest, felt the heat rising in her cheeks. She should shut this down right now, should tell Yates that she could never feel that way about him, that she was a married woman, and he needed to respect that. But she could not make the words come out, because they would be a lie, and she was so tired of lying. Mr. Ashford, she began, but he cut her off gently. Yates, he said. Please, just call me Yates. Yates, she repeated, tasting his name on her tongue. I do not know what you are asking me. I am asking if you would consider the possibility that maybe we were meant to meet, Yates said. That maybe there is a reason I came to Hecla beyond just the horses. I am asking if you feel what I feel when we are in the same room together. Victoria closed her eyes. I am married. To a man who beats you, Yates said bluntly. To a man who treats you like property. That is not a marriage, Victoria. That is a prison sentence. The sound of her first name on his lips sent a shiver through her. No one had called her Victoria in so long. Marcus called her woman or wife or nothing at all. The church ladies called her Sister Hayes or dear. But Yates said Victoria like it was something precious, like she was someone who mattered. If I leave with you, she said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze, I can never come back here. Marcus would kill me if I tried. I know, Yates said, but maybe that is not such a bad thing. Maybe you need to leave this place behind and start fresh somewhere new. And what happens when you get me to Denver and deliver me to your sister? Victoria asked. What happens then? Do you just ride away and leave me there? Yates was quiet for a long moment. That would be up to you, he said finally. I would not presume to tell you what to do with your life, Victoria. but I would like the chance to get to know you better, to see if what I think is between us is real. If you wanted that too, I would stay in Denver for a while. If you did not want that, I would leave and you would never have to see me again. Either way, you would be safe and free to make your own choices. Victoria felt tears sliding down her cheeks. The idea of being free to make her own choices was so foreign, so impossible sounding that she almost could not comprehend it. But God, how she wanted it. How she wanted to wake up in the morning without fear knotted in her stomach. How she wanted to go to bed at night without wondering if this would be the time Marcus finally went too far. How she wanted to feel like a person again instead of just a thing to be used and discarded. I am afraid, she whispered. I know, Yates said. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle. But I will be with you every step of the way. You will not be alone in this. Victoria looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled protectively around hers. It was the first time a man had touched her with tenderness in years, and the ache it created in her chest was almost unbearable. I need time to think, she said. You have until Saturday morning, Yates said. I will be bringing the horses into town at dawn. If you want to come with me, be at the livery stable before the sun comes up. Bring whatever you can carry, but travel light. We will have to move fast. Victoria nodded, and Yates squeezed her hand once before letting go. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Victoria, he said, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I meant what I said. You deserve better than this. You deserve to be happy. Do not let fear or duty or anything else convince you otherwise. Then he was gone, and Victoria was left alone in the silent house with the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on her. The next 3 days were the longest of Victoria's life. She moved through her routines mechanically, her mind elsewhere, trying to weigh the impossible choice before her. Stay or go, safety or freedom, the known horror of her current life, or the unknown terror of something new. She prayed about it, or tried to, but the prayers felt hollow. She had prayed for 3 years for Marcus to change, and he had not. How could she trust that God would guide her now, when he had seemed so silent for so long? Or maybe God had been answering her prayers all along, and the answer was Yates Ashford showing up in Hecla with an offer of escape. Maybe this was the miracle she had been waiting for, and she was just too scared to recognize it. Marcus was in a foul mood all week, drinking more than usual, picking fights over nothing. On Thursday night, he hit her hard enough to split her lip, and on Friday he shoved her into the wall so hard she saw stars. Each blow, each insult, made Victoria's decision a little easier. This was her life if she stayed. More of this forever, until Marcus killed her, or she killed herself, or she just withered away into nothing. On Friday night, after Marcus had passed out drunk on the floor, Victoria made her final preparations. She packed a small bag with her most practical clothes, a few personal items that had belonged to her mother, and the small amount of money she had managed to save. It was not much, but it was all she had. She hid the bag under the bed, where Marcus would not see it if he stumbled into the bedroom during the night. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Her hands shook as she formed the words, but she forced herself to keep going. Marcus, she wrote, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I have prayed for 3 years for you to change, for God to soften your heart and make you the man I thought you were when we married. But you have only gotten worse, and I cannot stay any longer. I am leaving, and I am not coming back. Do not try to find me. This marriage is over. She did not sign it with love, because that would have been a lie. She just signed her name, Victoria, and left the letter on the table where he would find it in the morning. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark and watched the hours tick by, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Part of her kept waiting for herself to change her mind, to chicken out, to decide that the devil she knew was safer than the devil she did not. But as the night wore on and dawn approached, Victoria felt a strange calm settle over her. This was the right thing to do. She knew it in her bones. Yates had been right. She had prayed long enough. At 4 in the morning, with the sky just starting to lighten in the east, Victoria eased out of bed. Marcus was still unconscious, his snores rattling through the house. She dressed quickly in her most practical clothes, pulled on her sturdiest boots, and picked up the bag she had packed. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a moment, looking at Marcus's sprawled form, and felt nothing. No love, no regret, no second thoughts. Just a vast empty relief that she would never have to see him again. She walked out of the house without looking back. The streets of Hecla were empty and dark, the town still asleep. Victoria moved quickly, keeping to the shadows, her bag clutched tight to her chest. Every sound made her jump, every stray dog or gust of wind sending her heart racing. She half expected Marcus to come barreling out of the darkness, to drag her back to the house and beat her within an inch of her life for daring to leave, but the night remained quiet, and she made it to the livery stable without incident. Yates was already there, saddling his bay mare by lantern light. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and the relief that flooded his face was unmistakable. "You came," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. "I came," Victoria confirmed, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it had not been before. She was really doing this. She was really leaving. Yates crossed to her in 3 long strides and took her bag, slinging it over his shoulder. "We need to move fast," he said. "I want to be well out of town before anyone realizes you are gone." He had a second horse already saddled, a gentle-looking gray mare. Yates helped Victoria mount, his hands steadying her as she settled into the saddle. She had not ridden much, but she knew the basics, and the mare seemed calm and well-trained. "Stay close to me," Yates said, swinging up onto his own horse. "We are going to ride hard for the first few hours, put as much distance as we can between us and Hecla. Can you manage that?" "I can manage," Victoria said, and she was surprised to find she meant it. Fear and adrenaline had given her a kind of desperate strength. They rode out of the livery stable just as the first rays of sun were breaking over the mountains, turning the sky pink and gold. Victoria did not look back at Hecla. She kept her eyes fixed forward, on the open road ahead, on the vast expanse of Montana territory stretching out before them. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, riding into an uncertain future with a man she barely knew, and she had never felt so terrified or so free in her entire life. They rode hard, as Yates had promised, the horses' hooves thundering against the hard-packed earth. The morning air was cool and crisp, and Victoria filled her lungs with it, tasting freedom for the first time. Every mile they covered was another mile between her and Marcus, another step toward a different life. The sun climbed higher, turning the air hot and heavy. They stopped briefly at a creek to water the horses and rest, and Yates pulled out a canteen and some jerky for them to share. Victoria ate mechanically, too keyed up to really taste anything, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon behind them for signs of pursuit. "He will not catch us," Yates said quietly, as if reading her mind. "Even if he realizes you are gone right away, he will have no idea which direction we went, and we have a good head start." "He will be so angry," Victoria said, and she could not keep the tremor out of her voice. "Let him be angry," Yates said. "He cannot hurt you anymore." Victoria looked at him, this man who had ridden into her life barely a month ago and turned everything upside down. In the bright morning light, she could see the lines around his eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck. He was handsome, she realized, in a rough, weathered kind of way. But more than that, he was good. There was a fundamental decency to him that shone through in everything he did. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. "And do not tell me it is just because it is the right thing to do. There is more to it than that." Yates was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horses grazing by the creek. "I told you I have a sister in Denver," he said finally. "What I did not tell you is that she was in a situation a lot like yours years ago. Married to a man who hurt her, trapped with no way out. I was just a kid, maybe 14, and I could not do anything to help her. I had to watch her suffer for years before she finally got the courage to leave. It near about killed her getting out of that marriage, and I swore to myself that if I ever had the chance to help someone in a similar situation, I would not stand by and do nothing. He turned to look at Victoria then, and his gray eyes were intense. But if I am being honest, it is more than that with you. From the first moment I saw you at that well pump, looking so lost and brave at the same time, something in me recognized something in you, like calls to maybe. And then I got to know you, even just a little bit, and I realized you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. You have survived 3 years of hell, and you are still standing, still hoping, still fighting. How could I not want to help you? How could I not care what happens to you? Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. I do not feel strong. I feel like a coward who should have left years ago. You are not a coward, Yates said firmly. It takes tremendous courage to stay alive in the face of what you were dealing with, and it takes even more courage to decide that you deserve better and walk away. You are the bravest person I know, Victoria Hayes. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words would not come. Instead, she just nodded and wiped at her eyes, trying to pull herself together. They had a long journey ahead of them still. They rode through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By evening, they had covered more than 40 miles, and Yates said they were safe enough to make camp for the night. He found a secluded spot off the main road, near a stand of trees with a small spring, and helped Victoria down from her horse. Her legs were shaky after so many hours in the saddle, and she nearly fell. Yates caught her easily, his hands steadying her, and for a moment they stood very close together, his face inches from hers. Victoria felt her breath catch, felt the heat of his body warming her in the cool evening air. She could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could smell the clean scent of leather and horse and something uniquely him. Yates stepped back carefully, putting space between them. "You did well today," he said, his voice a little rough. "I know that was hard riding for someone who is not used to it." "I will be sore tomorrow," Victoria admitted, rubbing at her lower back. "We will take it a bit easier," Yates promised. "Now that we have some distance, we do not need to push quite so hard." He set about making camp with the easy efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. He built a small fire, unpacked bedrolls, and made coffee and beans for their supper. Victoria tried to help, but Yates waved her off, insisting she rest. They ate in companionable silence as the stars came out overhead, more stars than Victoria had ever seen, the sky a vast canopy of light. It was beautiful and overwhelming at the same time, a reminder of how small she was, how big the world was, how much she had yet to discover. "Tell me about your sister," Victoria said, breaking the silence. "The one in Denver." Yates smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and lighter. "Her name is Sarah. She is 10 years older than me, practically raised me after our parents died. She is tough as nails and has a heart bigger than the whole territory. You will like her, I think. And she will like you." "What if she does not want to help me?" Victoria asked. "What if she thinks I should have stayed with Marcus?" "Sarah would never think that," Yates said firmly. "She knows better than anyone what it is like to be trapped in a bad marriage. She will welcome you with open arms, I promise." Victoria wanted to believe him, but it was hard to trust in the kindness of strangers after years of disappointment. "And what about you?" she asked. "You said you would stay in Denver for a while, if I wanted you to. But what if I do not want that? What if I need space to figure out who I am without a man in my life?" "Then I would respect that," Yates said simply. "I am not trying to replace Marcus, Victoria. I am not trying to own you or control you. I just want the chance to see if what I think is between us is real. But if you decide you would rather I leave you alone, I will do that. Your freedom is your own." I would never try to take that from you. Victoria studied his face in the firelight, looking for any sign of deception or manipulation, but she found none. Yates meant what he said. He was offering her something that Marcus never had, something the church had never taught her to expect. He was offering her a choice. I do not know what I want yet, she said honestly. Everything is happening so fast. A week ago, I was still trying to convince myself that maybe things would get better with Marcus. And now I am sitting here in the middle of nowhere with a man I barely know, running away from my entire life. I need time to process all of this. You have all the time you need, Yates said. We have at least a week of travel ahead of us before we reach Denver. That is a week for you to think and decide what you want your future to look like. Victoria nodded, grateful for his patience. They finished their meal and cleaned up, and then Yates spread out the bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, giving her privacy and space. Victoria lay down and pulled the blanket up to her chin, staring up at the stars, her mind racing. She thought about Marcus, wondered if he had found her letter yet, what his reaction had been. Rage, certainly. Maybe panic, too, when he realized she was really gone. He would go to the church women, would try to rally them to his side, would paint himself as the victim, and Victoria as the wayward wife who had abandoned her sacred duties. But Victoria found she did not care what they thought anymore. She was done living her life according to other people's expectations and judgments. She thought about Yates lying just a few feet away on the other side of the fire. She could hear his breathing, slow and steady, and the sound was oddly comforting. He had given her more respect and kindness in a month than Marcus had given her in 3 years. He had listened to her, believed her, helped her when no one else would. She was drawn to him in a way that should probably frighten her, but somehow did not. With Yates, she felt safe. She felt seen. She felt like maybe she could be herself, whoever that was, and it would be enough. Sleep finally claimed her, pulling her down into dreams that were confused and fragmented but not nightmares. For the first time in years, Victoria slept without fear. The next 6 days passed in a blur of riding and camping and slow, tentative conversations. Yates proved to be an easy travel companion, patient and considerate, never pushing her to talk more than she wanted to, but always willing to listen when she did. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their childhoods, discussing books they had read and places they had been. Victoria found herself laughing, really laughing for the first time in years, surprised by Yates's dry sense of humor and the way he could find joy in small things. She also found herself noticing things about him that had nothing to do with gratitude or relief. The way his hands moved when he was working with the horses, gentle and sure. The way he smiled when he caught her watching him. A slow curve of his lips that made her stomach flip. The way his voice dropped lower when they sat by the fire at night, talking in the darkness, the intimate tone of someone sharing secrets. Victoria was falling in love with him. The realization came to her on the 5th night of their journey, as she sat across the fire from Yates and watched him whittle a piece of wood into some unrecognizable shape. She was falling in love with this quiet, decent man who had rescued her from hell and asked nothing in return. It should have terrified her, should have sent her running in the opposite direction. Instead, it filled her with a strange, fierce hope. "Yates," she said, and he looked up from his whittling, his eyes meeting hers across the flames. "I need to tell you something." "All right," he said, setting aside the wood and giving her his full attention. Victoria took a breath, trying to find the right words. "When we get to Denver and I meet your sister and I start figuring out what my life is going to look like now, I do not want you to leave. I want you to stay. I want to see if this thing between us is real, because I think it might be. I think I might be falling in love with you, and I know that is crazy because we have only known each other for a little over a month, and I am still technically married, and everything is so complicated, but I cannot help how I feel. You make me want to believe in good things again. You make me feel like maybe I deserve to be happy." Yates was very still for a moment, his face unreadable in the firelight. Then he stood up and walked around the fire to where Victoria sat. He knelt down in front of her, taking her hands in his touch warm and solid and real. Victoria, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. I have been waiting for you to say something like that since the day I met you. I have been half in love with you from the moment I saw you standing by that well pump, and the more I got to know you, the deeper I fell. I told myself I should not push, should not pressure you, should give you time and space to heal. But I want you to know that I am all in. If you want me to stay in Denver, I will stay. If you want me to court you proper and take things slow, I will do that. If you want me to spend the rest of my life proving to you that not all men are like Marcus, that you deserve to be loved and cherished and treated with respect, I will count myself the luckiest man alive to have the chance to do that. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were not tears of pain or fear. They were tears of relief and joy, and the overwhelming sense that maybe, just maybe, she was going to be all right. Kiss me, she whispered, and Yates did not need to be told twice. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft and sweet and tentative, nothing like the brutal, demanding kisses Marcus had forced on her. Yates kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be treasured, and Victoria felt something inside her that had been frozen for years begin to thaw. When they finally pulled apart, Yates rested his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with hers. I will spend the rest of my life making you happy, he promised, if you will let me. I will let you, Victoria said, and she was smiling, really smiling for the first time in longer than she could remember. They reached Denver 7 days after leaving Hecla. The city was bigger and louder and more overwhelming than anything Victoria had ever experienced, a sprawling collection of buildings and people and noise. Yates led them through the streets with the confidence of someone who knew the way, finally pulling up in front of a large, well-kept boarding house on the edge of the respectable part of town. A woman came out onto the porch as they dismounted, and Victoria knew immediately that this was Sarah. She had Yates's eyes, that same clear gray, and the same quiet strength in the set of her shoulders. She was in her mid-30s, Victoria guessed, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and a no-nonsense air about her. Yates, Sarah said, coming down the steps to embrace her brother. I got your telegram. I have been expecting you. Yates had sent a message ahead from a town they had passed through 2 days ago, explaining the situation in the briefest terms. Victoria had been terrified of what Sarah's reaction would be, but the older woman turned to her now with a warm smile and kind eyes. You must be Victoria, Sarah said. Welcome to Denver. I am so glad you are here. Victoria felt her throat close up. Thank you for taking me in. I promise I will work hard to earn my keep. I will not be a burden. You are not a burden, Sarah said firmly. You are a woman who needed help, and I am happy to give it. Now come inside. You both look exhausted, and I imagine you could use a hot bath and a good meal. Sarah's boarding house was warm and welcoming, with comfortable furniture and clean rooms and the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen. She showed Victoria to a small room on the second floor, simply furnished but cozy, and told her to rest while she heated water for a bath. Victoria stood in the middle of the room and looked around, trying to comprehend that this was hers. This space, this safety, this chance to start over. It did not feel real yet. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Marcus to burst through the door and drag her back to Hecla, for someone to tell her this had all been a mistake or a dream. But the hours passed, and no one came. Victoria bathed and changed into clean clothes and joined Sarah and Yates for dinner in the kitchen. The food was simple but delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. Sarah had a quick wit and a kind heart, and she made Victoria feel welcome in a way that eased some of the anxiety knotted in her chest. After dinner, Yates walked Victoria back to her room. They stood in the hallway, neither wanting to say goodnight, the air between them charged with unspoken things. Are you all right? Yates asked softly. I think so, Victoria said. It is strange being here. being safe. I keep waiting for something terrible to happen. Nothing terrible is going to happen, Yates promised. You are free now, Victoria. You get to decide what your life looks like. I want it to look like this, Victoria said, gesturing to the space between them. I want you in it, if you still want that too. I do, Yates said, and there was no hesitation in his voice. More than anything. He kissed her then, there in the hallway of his sister's boarding house, and Victoria kissed him back with all the hope and fear and love tangled up inside her. When they finally broke apart, Yates smiled at her, that slow, warm smile that made her heart race. Get some rest, he said. We have all the time in the world now. Victoria watched him walk away, then went into her room and closed the door. She lay down on the bed, softer and more comfortable than anything she had slept on in years, and stared up at the ceiling. She was in Denver. She was free. She was falling in love with a man who treated her like she mattered. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at the same time. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new experiences and routines. Sarah put Victoria to work helping run the boarding house, teaching her how to manage the books and deal with tenants and keep everything running smoothly. Victoria proved to be a quick learner, and she found she had a knack for organization and dealing with people. For the first time in her life, she felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with being a wife or a housekeeper. She was contributing something of value, using her mind as well as her hands. Yates stayed in Denver, taking a job at a nearby ranch training horses. He courted Victoria properly the way she deserved, taking her on walks through the city, bringing her flowers, sitting with her on the porch in the evenings and talking about everything and nothing. He was patient with her, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, letting her set the pace. Victoria found herself healing, slowly but surely. The bruises faded from her skin, and the deeper wounds, the ones that could not be seen, began to close as well. She laughed more easily, smiled more often, slept through the night without nightmares. She was learning who she was outside of the shadow of Marcus's cruelty, discovering the woman she might have been if she had not spent 3 years being beaten down and broken. 3 months after arriving in Denver, Victoria received a letter forwarded from Hecla. It was from the court, informing her that Marcus had filed for divorce on the grounds of abandonment. Victoria read the letter twice, then took it to Yates. He is divorcing me, she said, and she could not keep the disbelief out of her voice. Yates read the letter, then looked up at her with a smile. That is good news, is it not? He is setting you free. I thought he would never let me go, Victoria said. I thought he would spend the rest of his life trying to drag me back. Maybe someone talked sense into him, Yates suggested. Or maybe he just decided you were not worth the trouble of chasing down. Either way, this is your chance to really start over. Once the divorce is final, you will be free to do whatever you want with your life. Victoria sat down heavily, the letter still clutched in her hand. I can hardly believe it. Yates knelt in front of her, taking her free hand in his. Believe it, Victoria. You are getting your life back. The question is, what do you want to do with it? Victoria looked at him, at this good, kind man who had helped her escape and had stayed by her side through everything. I want to build something new. She said. With you, if you still want that. I have wanted that since the moment I met you, Yates said. But I need to know if you are choosing me because you love me or because you are grateful to me for helping you leave Marcus. I need to know that you are not just trading one dependence for another. Victoria cupped his face in her hands, looking into those clear gray eyes. I am choosing you because I love you, she said firmly. Because you make me laugh and you make me feel safe and you treat me like an equal. Because when I think about my future, I cannot imagine it without you in it. I am not the same scared, broken woman you met in Hecla, Yates. You helped me become someone new, someone stronger, and that person loves you with everything she has. Yates's smile was radiant. Then marry me, he said. Once the divorce is final, marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice. Yes, Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I will marry you. The divorce was finalized in December, 6 months after Victoria had left Hecla. She signed the papers with a sense of relief and closure, officially ending a chapter of her life that had nearly destroyed her. 2 weeks later, on a cold, bright morning in late December of 1889, Victoria Hayes married Yates Ashford in a simple ceremony at Sarah's boarding house, with Sarah and a few close friends as witnesses. Victoria wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had helped her make, and she carried a small bouquet of winter flowers. Yates wore his best suit, and when he looked at Victoria as she walked toward him, his face was full of such love and pride that she felt her heart might burst. The preacher who married them was nothing like the one who had married her to Marcus. He spoke about partnership and mutual respect, about love being a choice that was made new every day. He talked about how marriage should be a source of joy, not pain, and how both partners should lift each other up rather than tear each other down. Victoria found herself crying through most of the ceremony, overwhelmed by the difference between this wedding and her first one. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Victoria kissed him back with all the love and hope and gratitude that filled her to overflowing. They had a small celebration afterward, with cake and coffee and laughter, and then Yates took Victoria to the small house he had rented for them on the outskirts of Denver. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a tiny yard, but it was theirs, a place where they could build a life together on their own terms. That night, lying in bed beside her new husband, Victoria felt a peace she had never known. Yates held her gently, his arms a safe harbor rather than a prison, and Victoria finally understood what it meant to be truly loved. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Yates asked, his voice sleepy and content. "For telling me I had prayed long enough," Victoria said. "For helping me see that I deserved better. For giving me a chance at a different life." Yates kissed the top of her head. "You gave yourself that chance," he said. "All I did was hold the door open. You were the one brave enough to walk through it." The years that followed were not always easy. Victoria had nightmares sometimes, flashbacks to her time with Marcus that left her shaking and afraid. There were moments when she struggled to trust, when the old patterns of fear and submission tried to reassert themselves. But Yates was patient with her, helping her work through the trauma, reminding her again and again that she was safe now, that he would never hurt her the way Marcus had. Slowly, Victoria fully became the person she had been meant to be before Marcus had crushed that potential out of her. She was strong and capable and full of life. She continued to help Sarah with the boarding house, and eventually she and Yates saved enough money to buy a small ranch outside Denver where Yates could train horses full time. Victoria proved to have a talent for the business side of things, managing the books and dealing with clients, and together they built a successful operation. 2 years after they married, Victoria gave birth to a son. They named him Samuel, and he had Yates's gray eyes and Victoria's stubborn determination. Watching Yates with their baby, seeing the gentleness and love with which he handled his son, Victoria felt her heart heal a little more. This was what family was supposed to look like. This was what love was supposed to feel like. 3 years later, a daughter came along, red-faced and loud, and they named her Rose. Then another son 2 years after that, Henry, and finally another daughter, Grace, when Victoria was 30. Their house was full of noise and chaos and laughter, the kind of home Victoria had dreamed of but never thought she would have. Yates was the kind of father Victoria had always wished for, patient and present, teaching their children to ride and read and think for themselves. He never raised a hand to them in anger, never spoke to them with the cruelty that Marcus had shown Victoria. He loved them fiercely and showed them every day what it meant to be a good person. Victoria sometimes thought about Marcus, wondered what had become of him. She had heard through Sarah, who still had contacts in Montana, that he had remarried within a year of their divorce, some poor woman who did not know what she was getting into. Victoria prayed for that woman sometimes, hoped she would find the strength to leave if things got bad, hoped she would not make the mistake of staying and praying for change that would never come. But mostly Victoria did not look back. She was too busy living the life she had fought so hard to claim, too focused on the present and the future to dwell on the past. She had 4 beautiful children, a husband who loved her, and work that fulfilled her. She had friends and a community and a sense of purpose. She had everything she had ever wanted and some things she had never even known to want. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Victoria with a trip back to Montana. Not to Hecla, but to the mountains where they had camped on their journey to Denver all those years ago. They left the children with Sarah for a few days and rode out into the wilderness, just the two of them, retracing the path they had taken when Victoria had been fleeing one life and riding toward another. They made camp by the same creek where they had stopped that first night, and Victoria sat by the fire and looked up at the stars, the same vast canopy of light that had overwhelmed her 15 years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked quietly. "Leaving the way you did? Starting over with nothing?" Victoria turned to look at her husband, this man who had given her everything that mattered. His hair was starting to gray at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him riding into Hecla. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "Leaving Marcus and coming with you was the best decision I ever made. You saved my life, Yates. You showed me that I deserved better, that I was worth saving. And then you spent the last 15 years proving to me every single day that I made the right choice." Yates reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You saved yourself," he said, echoing the words he had spoken on their wedding night. "I just held the door open." "We saved each other," Victoria said, and she knew it was true. She had needed Yates to show her the way out, but he had needed her too. Needed to be the kind of man who helped rather than hurt, who built up rather than tore down. They had made each other better, stronger, more whole. They sat together by the fire as the night deepened, talking about their children and their ranch, and all the dreams they still had for the future. They talked about growing old together, about watching their children grow up and have families of their own, about all the years still ahead of them. And when they finally lay down in their bedrolls, Yates pulled Victoria close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the woman she had been 15 years ago, kneeling by that well pump in Hecla, praying desperately for a change that never came. She thought about how broken and hopeless that woman had been, how certain she had been that her life would never be anything more than pain and fear and endless gray sameness. That woman would hardly recognize the person Victoria had become, strong and confident and loved, a mother, a wife, a business owner, a survivor, someone who had been through hell and come out the other side not just intact, but thriving. The church women in Hecla had told her to stay and pray for Marcus to change. They had told her that suffering was the path to holiness, that endurance was a virtue, that a good wife never gave up on her husband no matter what. But Yates had told her something different. He had told her that she had prayed long enough. He had told her that she deserved better. He had given her permission to save herself, and she had. She had walked away from everything familiar and safe, had ridden off into the unknown with a stranger, had rebuilt her entire life from the ground up. It had been the hardest thing she had ever done, and the best thing too. As sleep pulled her under, warm and safe in Yates's arms, Victoria sent up a prayer of gratitude, not to the God the church women had preached about, the stern, demanding God who required women to submit and suffer, but to the God she had come to know in the years since leaving Hecla, the God who wanted his children to be happy and free and whole. The God who had sent Yates Ashford riding into her life at exactly the moment when she needed him most. "Thank you," she prayed silently. "Thank you for showing me that I deserved better. Thank you for giving me the courage to leave. Thank you for Yates and our children and this beautiful life. Thank you for teaching me that love should never hurt, that marriage should be a partnership, that I was always worth saving. Thank you for letting me know that I had prayed long enough. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and Victoria slept peacefully, dreaming of all the good years still to come, of grandchildren and laughter and growing old with the man who had loved her enough to set her free. The nightmare of her first marriage was long behind her now, faded to nothing more than a distant memory, a cautionary tale she would someday share with her daughters to make sure they knew they had choices, that they never had to settle for less than they deserved. But for now, in this moment, there was just peace and love and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Victoria Hayes Ashford had found her happy ending, and it was sweeter than anything she had ever imagined in those dark days when she thought there was no way out. She had prayed for change for 3 years, and in the end, the change had come. Not in the form she expected, not as a transformation of Marcus into someone better, but as a cowboy with kind gray eyes who told her she had waited long enough, that she deserved more, that freedom was possible if she was brave enough to reach for it. And she had been brave enough. That was the miracle. That was the answer to all those desperate prayers. Not a change in Marcus, but a change in herself, a recognition of her own worth and her own power. The strength to leave had been inside her all along. Yates had just helped her find it. Years later, when her children were grown and starting families of their own, when she had grandchildren climbing on her lap and asking her to tell them stories, Victoria would think back on that morning when she walked out of the house in Hecla for the last time. She would remember the fear and the uncertainty, but also the fierce determination, the bone-deep knowledge that she was doing the right thing even though it was the hardest thing. And she would tell her granddaughters when they were old enough to understand that love should never hurt, that marriage should be a partnership built on respect and trust, that they should never settle for a man who made them feel small or afraid, that if they ever found themselves in a situation where they were being hurt, they should not wait and pray for their partner to change. They should get out. They should save themselves because they deserved better. And there were good men in the world, men like their grandfather, who would treat them with the kindness and respect they deserved. Victoria lived to be 78 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, beloved by everyone who knew her. Yates was by her side until the very end, holding her hand as she slipped away peacefully in her sleep, still whispering that he loved her, that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And in those final moments, as Victoria's life flashed before her eyes, she saw it all. The pain and the fear and the escape, the long ride to Denver and the tentative beginning of love, the wedding and the children and the ranch and all the beautiful ordinary moments that had made up a life well lived, a life she had claimed for herself when everyone else told her to stay and endure. She had prayed long enough, and then she had taken action. That was the lesson. That was the gift she left behind for all the women who came after her. Prayer was important. Faith was important, but so was recognizing when it was time to stop waiting for someone else to save you and start saving yourself. Victoria Hayes. Ashford died as she had lived the last 50 years of her life, peacefully, surrounded by love, knowing that she had made the right choice all those years ago when she walked out of that house in Hecla and rode off into the sunrise with a cowboy who had told her she deserved better. She had believed him, and in believing him, she had saved herself. That was the real miracle. That was the answer to every prayer she had ever spoken. Not a change in her circumstances from outside forces, but the courage to change her own circumstances, to claim the life she deserved, and build something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The end.